You're not welcome here anymore. My brother Daniel's voice was firm, sharp. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that my parents heard it and didn't say a word. No protest, no reaction. They just accepted it. As if it was obvious. As if my presence there had never mattered. I stood in the middle of the living room, waiting for something, anything, to show that there was still a trace of love for me in that house. But nothing came. My father flipped through a newspaper, not even glancing up. My mother washed the dishes with the calmness of someone who hadn't just witnessed her own son being thrown out. So that's it? My voice came out low, barely more than a whisper. No one answered. I looked at each of their faces, searching for some emotion, some sign of hesitation. Maybe a hidden regret? But no. My parents remained the same, as if I weren't even there. The silence was deafening, the kind of silence that spoke louder than any shout. And in that moment I knew, they had decided long ago that I was no longer part of this family. The truth is, it didn't completely surprise me. I had felt this rejection for years, slowly growing like a silent disease. When we were kids, Daniel was always the favorite. If he got average grades, at least he passed. If I got the best grades in the class, that's your responsibility. If he came home drunk, it's just a phase. If I stayed up late studying for a test, you're wasting electricity. I didn't notice it at first. I kept trying to please them, to prove that I also deserved love, recognition. But nothing was ever enough. In my parents' house, I had always been an unwanted guest. And over time, the cold treatment turned into indifference. Indifference turned into contempt. And contempt finally became what I was hearing now. My expulsion. Daniel crossed his arms, smirking at me. He had always hated me, always seen me as an intruder in what he considered his house. And now, he was finally getting what he wanted, getting rid of me. Did you not hear me? Get your stuff and leave. I took a deep breath, swallowing the lump in my throat. Part of me wanted to explode, to scream, to say everything that had been bottled up inside me for years. But I knew it would be pointless. So for the last time I looked at my parents. My father didn't even lift his eyes from the newspaper. My mother, she didn't stop washing the dishes. They weren't going to ask me to stay. I think that was the moment when something inside me died for good. I climbed the stairs slowly, my feet feeling as heavy as lead. With each step, I grew further from that family, but at the same time I felt lighter. Deep down, I had always known this day would come. I just hadn't expected it to hurt this much. I closed the door behind me and collapsed onto my bed, staring at the ceiling. My eyes burned, but I wasn't going to cry. Not anymore. If they didn't want me there, then I wouldn't stay. I stayed in my room for hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how things had come to this. I knew my parents had never really treated me like a son, but hearing those words out loud, spoken with such certainty, with such coldness, that was different. You're not welcome here anymore. I was no longer welcome in the house where I grew up. The one place that was supposed to make me feel safe. I tried to find some justification, some memory that could prove this was a mistake, that maybe it could all be fixed. But there was nothing. The truth was, I had never really had a home there. I could stay and beg them to take me back. But for what? To keep being treated like a stranger? To live under the same roof as people who didn't care whether I was there or not? No. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. The clock read 2:47 a.m. when I got out of bed. The house was drowned in absolute silence. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. I had to leave before sunrise. I grabbed an old backpack and started filling it with the essentials. A few clothes, my documents, my phone, and the little money I had saved. Exactly $64. Enough to survive? Not even close. But it was all I had. I opened my drawer and stared at my small collection of books, the ones I had gathered over the years. Each of them was a kind of refuge for me, a better world I could escape into when reality became unbearable. I ran my fingers along the spine of one of them, a worn-out copy of The Great Gatsby. It was my first book, the one that made me realize life could be bigger than this house, than this suffocating neighborhood. I wanted to take them all, but I couldn't. I didn't have the space or the strength to carry that much weight. So I grabbed just one, closed the drawer with a sigh, and kept going. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like everyone could hear it. Every step I took was carefully measured. I knew this floor better than anyone, and knew exactly which floorboards creaked. I stopped in front of my parents' bedroom door. My hand hovered in the air as if I wanted to knock, as if deep down I still hoped my mother would appear at the door and say, "Don't go. Please, stay." But I knew that wouldn't happen. I held my breath and kept walking. I passed through the living room without turning on any lights. My father's newspaper was still folded in the same spot on the table. The smell of cold coffee still lingered in the air. It was as if nothing had changed, as if life in that house would continue as usual, because for them, it would. My absence wouldn't make a difference. I slowly opened the front door, feeling the cold night air hit my face. The world outside felt terrifying, but at least out there I had a chance. I stepped through the door and closed it without a sound. I didn't leave a note. I didn't leave a message. If they didn't care about throwing me out, then they didn't need to know where I was going. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and looked back. The house was dark, as if that place had never been my home, and maybe it never really had been. The icy wind cut through my thin jacket and reality began to sink in. I was alone, no home, not enough money, no clear destination. And for the first time, real fear set in. But along with the fear, a certainty grew inside me. I would never come back to this place. I took a step, then another, and disappeared into the darkness of the night. The cold night air cut through my skin as I walked aimlessly. The silence of the street was unsettling, and the only thing accompanying me was the sound of my own footsteps on the asphalt. I had no idea where to go, no plan, no one to ask for help. But one thing was certain: I wasn't going back to that house. I stopped at an empty bus stop and sat on the freezing metal bench. My body trembled, but I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or the adrenaline of everything that had just happened. I was officially alone in the world. That was when I pulled my phone from my pocket and looked at the screen. 15 missed calls. My heart skipped a beat. Who could have called me so many times? My first thought was my mother. Maybe deep down, she had regretted it. Maybe she had realized that kicking me out like that had been too cruel. But when I unlocked the screen and saw the name on the display, my chest turned cold. It wasn't my mother or my father. The calls were from an unsaved number, but I recognized it. I knew exactly who it was. And that person had never called me before. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the call button. Part of me wanted to ignore it, toss my phone into my backpack, and pretend I hadn't seen it. But another part knew this meant something. No one calls 15 times in the middle of the night without a reason. I took a deep breath and hit redial. The phone rang 3 times before someone answered. Hello? The voice on the other end sounded anxious, like they had been desperately waiting for this call. I swallowed hard before answering. Hello? Who is this? There was a pause, and then the reply came, soft, hesitant, but carrying something I couldn't quite identify. It's me, Emily. My chest tightened. I hadn't spoken to Emily in months, my ex-girlfriend, The only person who had truly been on my side when things started falling apart at home. The only one who told me to leave before it was too late, and the person I had pushed away when things got unbearable. I had cut off contact, ignored her messages, pretended I didn't need help. But there she was, calling me 15 times in the middle of the night. "Emily?" My voice shook. "Where are you?" she asked, straight to the point. I hesitated. I didn't know if I should tell her the truth. Did something happen? There was a pause. She took a deep breath before answering. "Daniel called me." My stomach twisted. Daniel? My brother? The same one who kicked me out of the house? I couldn't think of a single reason why he would have called Emily, and that scared me. What did he want? My voice came out lower than I intended. Emily hesitated. "He said you disappeared, that you left home and no one knows where you are." He sounded nervous. I let out a bitter laugh. Nervous? He had the nerve to throw me out, and now he was worried. But something in Emily's tone made me swallow hard. "There's more, isn't there?" She sighed. "Yeah." And then she said something that made my blood run cold. "He said you don't know the truth, that you're making a mistake." My heart pounded. What truth? What mistake? My head was spinning. Was this just another one of Daniel's mind games? Or was there actually something I didn't know? What was he hiding from me? My thoughts were a mess. I didn't trust Daniel, but why would he be so desperate to find me after throwing me out? Emily waited for me to say something, but I had no answer. I had no idea what to do. Then she spoke again. "Meet me. Now." I hesitated. But maybe this was my only chance to find out the truth. I grabbed my backpack, took a deep breath, and started walking. I didn't know what was waiting for me, but something told me my story was far from over. The cold night air felt even sharper as I walked through the empty streets, my heart pounding. What was Daniel hiding? What could be so important that it made him reach out to Emily, the only person who still cared about me? Emily had always been my anchor. During the worst moments in that house, she was the one who held my hand and told me to hang on. She was the one who saw the truth I refused to accept. And even after I pushed her away, she was still here, looking for me in the middle of the night. With every step I took toward the 24-hour diner where we agreed to meet, my mind tried to put the pieces together. If Daniel was so desperate to find me, something didn't add up. He had thrown me out, humiliated me, told me in front of our parents that I wasn't welcome anymore. And now he wanted to talk to me. The feeling that I was caught in something much bigger than I had realized started to grow inside me. I stepped into the diner and immediately spotted Emily sitting at a corner table facing the door. Her eyes were full of concern. The moment she saw me, she stood up quickly and rushed over as if she needed to make sure I was really there. "Oh my God, are you okay?" Her voice was a mix of relief and desperation. I nodded, but we both knew I wasn't okay. Nothing in my life was okay. "Just tell me what's going on." Emily pulled me to sit down. She looked anxious, restless. "Daniel called me over and over. At first I ignored it because, well, it's Daniel." She made a face and I understood perfectly. But then he sent me a message saying he had to tell me something urgent, that it was about you. So I picked up. I crossed my arms. And what did he say? Emily took a deep breath, like she was bracing herself before dropping a bomb. "He said your dad is dying." The air left my lungs. "What?" My voice came out weak, barely a whisper. "Your dad has a serious illness, and they hid it from you." My mind spun. It had to be a lie, but at the same time, it made sense. Over the past few months, I had noticed my father getting weaker, avoiding arguments, spending more and more time locked in his room. I thought he was just tired. But what if it was more than that? I ran my hands over my face, trying to process everything. This doesn't make sense. If he's sick, why would they throw me out? Why treat me like I was a burden? Emily hesitated. Then she pulled out her phone and scrolled through her messages. She placed it in front of me. It was a voice message. From Daniel. I swallowed hard and hit play. My brother's voice came through lower than usual, carrying a tension I had rarely heard in him. Emily, listen. I did something terrible. I never wanted it to go this far, but now it's too late. My parents let me make a decision that I may never be able to fix. He took a deep breath. My dad's will. He left most of the inheritance to my brother. My heart stopped. I knew that if he found out, he wouldn't leave that house easily, so I made it seem like he wasn't welcome. I convinced our parents that it would be better this way, but now our dad might die, and I don't know how to fix this mess. The message ended, but my life would never be the same again. My fingers gripped the table. My head was burning. Daniel had kicked me out so he could take everything. It wasn't because he hated me. It wasn't because I was a burden. It was about money. A bitter taste filled my mouth. For years, I had tried to understand why my family treated me the way they did, why I was never enough. And now the truth was right in front of me. Emily placed her hand over mine. I didn't want to tell you like this, but you needed to know. My eyes stayed locked on the phone. My chest burned with rage, with indignation, with a fury I had never felt before. My parents had agreed to this. They had listened to Daniel and thrown me away like I was disposable. But now I knew the truth, and one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let this slide. The cafe around us felt distant, muffled. My mind pounded on one single thought. Daniel had kicked me out for money, and my parents had let him. Years of rejection, humiliation, and contempt, all because I was an obstacle in his way. My breathing was heavy, my blood boiled. I had spent my entire life trying to understand why I was never enough for my family, and now I knew. It was never about me. It was always about them. Emily squeezed my hand, pulling me back to reality. Her eyes were full of concern. What are you going to do? I took a deep breath. The anger inside me burned, but I wasn't going to lose control. If Daniel had played dirty, then he had no idea what I was capable of. I looked at Emily and said firmly, I'm going back. Her eyes widened. What? After everything they did to you? I nodded. But not the way they expect. They think I'm a failure, that I'll disappear into the world and never come back. But now I know the truth, and if my father really is dying, he needs to see me before it's too late. Emily stayed silent for a moment, then sighed. If you go back, you need to be ready. They're not going to welcome you with open arms. I met her gaze. I know. But I'm not going back for love. I'm going back to take what's mine. The next day I took a bus back to my family's house. The same place that had thrown me out in the dead of night now saw me return, head held high. I knocked on the door without hesitation. My mother answered. When she saw me, she went pale. What are you doing here? Her voice was cold, but there was a slight tremor in it. I kept my gaze steady. Where's Dad? Before she could answer, a rough voice came from behind her. Let him in. I stepped past my mother and saw my father sitting on the couch. He looked weak, thinner, his eyes tired. But even so, he stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. We need to talk, he said quietly. I sat in the chair across from him, feeling my brother's glare burning into me. Daniel looked uncomfortable, nervous, and I knew why. He never expected me to come back. Why did you come back? Daniel finally broke the silence. I crossed my arms. The real question is, why did you try to get rid of me? My brother's face turned pale. I know about the inheritance, Daniel. The air in the room became thick with tension. My mother looked away. My father closed his eyes for a moment, as if he had been expecting this moment to come. So that's why you threw me out? To take everything for yourself? My voice dripped with contempt. Daniel shot up from his seat. You were always a burden, always in the way. Dad always favored you for no reason. He scoffed. And for what? You don't even deserve it. You always acted like you were better than everyone else. I swallowed my anger and turned to my father. Is it true? You let them throw me out so he could take everything? He took a slow, deep breath, looking exhausted. It wasn't exactly like that. Then what was it? My voice was cold. He coughed, placing a hand on his chest. For a moment I saw just how fragile he really was. He truly was sick. I wanted to protect you. I raised an eyebrow. From who? Your own family? He sighed. I knew Daniel would do anything to take this house, the money. I knew that if you stayed, the conflict would only get worse. He looked me in the eyes. But I also knew that you were the only one who could leave this place and actually make something of yourself. A lump formed in my throat. A part of me wanted to believe him. But another part still carried the weight of abandonment. You didn't do anything while they threw me out. You just watched. He averted his eyes. I made a mistake. Yeah, you did. Daniel flopped back onto the couch, frustrated. None of this changes anything. The will has already been changed. But then came the surprise. My father coughed again and gave a small, knowing smile. No, it hasn't. Daniel froze. What? My father turned to me, meeting my gaze. I never changed a thing, son. My mother covered her mouth with her hands. Daniel went completely pale. So that means, he stammered. My father nodded. The majority still belongs to him. To me. A lump formed in my throat. I never cared about the money. I never wanted any of it. I just wanted to know that I wasn't nothing to them. But for Daniel, this was the end. His fists clenched in fury. This is bullshit. I should have everything. My father looked at him without emotion. And that's exactly why I never trusted you. I stood up. I had what I needed. I didn't need that house. I didn't need that money. But I did need to know that I was never the one in the wrong. I looked at Daniel one last time. You threw me out like I was nothing, but look at how things turned out. He trembled with rage. My mother said nothing. My father gave me a faint smile. And me? I walked out through the front door, for the first time, without looking back. Emily was waiting for me outside. When she saw me, she smiled. So? I took a deep breath. It's over. I was finally free. I had always thought my greatest wish was to have a family that loved me, but now I realized I didn't need that. I just needed to be free to be who I was. Daniel was left behind, consumed by his own greed. My parents had made their choice. And me? I was finally starting my real life. Far from them, far from everything that had ever caused me pain. And for the first time, I finally felt welcome.